today to talk about VR experiences that can be distributed without friction, with no application download and install, immediately shareable, indexable with links, giving content creators lots of freedom of choice with tools. And we have a great panel today of people who specialize in back-end and front-end technologies in WebVR. I'm going to go down the line and ask everyone to introduce themselves briefly, tell us what you're doing in this space. We'll get to the why later, but I want folks to know what each of you are doing in this world. And then we've got like about 30 minutes, and we're going to try and get some Q&A in the end. Okay.
Cool.
Samantha.
I'm Samantha. I run business development at JanusVR, which is a three-dimensional browser built from scratch. And I also run an agency and mixed reality art gallery here in Los Angeles. And we experiment with bringing the physical into the virtual and vice versa. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amber Roy. I'm a programmer with Oculus, one of the founding members of their WebVR team. And I'm working on React VR, which is an open source JavaScript framework for building WebVR applications.
Hi, I'm Alban, the co-founder and CEO of Sketchfab. Sketchfab is a platform to publish 3D content online and in VR. We have a community of almost a million creators. They've published more than 1.5 million 3D scenes, which have been explored by more than 100 million people today.
All right, thanks, guys. So I'm going to start this one. The first little set of questions we're going to get into is around why WebVR? We already have native ways to build our applications, distribute them through stores and Steam and vehicles like that. So that's where we're going to explore first. And I'm going to start with you, Amber. So I met the Oculus team that was doing WebVR last summer. You know, they brought me in and said, we're going to get into doing this stuff on the web. And after I pulled my jaw up off the floor in shock, they explained to me that they believe that a lot of content is going to be distributed over the web, and they're Facebook now, right? So Amber, can you tell me a little bit about that and how Oculus Facebook is leaning into this and why the web is so important and exactly what you're doing in that area?
Sure. So another reason that WebVR is interesting in Oculus is because it has the potential to dramatically expand the developer community that is creating VR experiences. So building with Unity or a game engine, is awesome, but not everyone is a game programmer. So being able to create VR content using JavaScript and web technologies can lower the barrier to entry into the VR ecosystem. And so we're hoping this is going to enable more people to create more cool stuff for VR.
And you might just explain to folks, because maybe not everyone's up to speed, there's two components of technology that you're actually involved in. That you're driving forward at Oculus. There's a browser and a framework. So can you give people a quick, sort of lay of the land on that? We'll come back to it and drill into those a little bit more, but just so people know exactly what we're talking about here.
Sure. So we have the Oculus browser on Gear VR, and there's a team that is building that. And my team is working on React VR, the open source framework that we just recently open sourced. And React VR is not limited to the Oculus platform. It'll run on any WebVR compatible browser. And on Carmel, you can run React VR apps as well as any other WebVR apps. That's
so cool. And yeah, so that means you put the headset on and you actually are in some kind of browsing experience already. Mm-hmm. Can you describe that? I mean, what do you see when I know it's like describing VR, but still, just give people a picture of what that means when you put on a VR headset and you're in a web browser. What do they experience?
Well, there's two modes for the Oculus browser. You can be in the 2D mode where you're just browsing a 2D web page. But then if you're on a WebVR page, and then you can actually enter VR, and then you'll be surrounded 360 degrees by the scene, like you would in any other VR app.
So to be clear, that's VR that is written in JavaScript and HTML5. Your browser is a rendering engine as well as it is a page renderer. And using the power of WebGL plus a few extensions to the browser APIs that track the head and let you gaze and tap or use your Vive controllers if you're on a desktop and that kind of thing, you actually have all the power of getting to the VR platform just using web technology. So that's so cool. All right, Samantha, we're going to get to you next. Let's talk about JanusVR. If I remember from a couple of years ago, you had a native client. It's sort of a social VR world. It's you can tell people more about it. Mm-hmm. But you started with a native client, and recently you've come up with a web client in the last year or so?
Yeah.
Yeah, so tell the world about that.
So we started with a native client 2013, building from scratch with a present server. So there was a social layer within the browser. I don't know if anybody remembers back in the DK1 when you went to the villa, but that was one of the sort of first JanusVR experiences, was portaling into that and making that social, which was pretty cool. And now we're exploring more the open source WebVR side with our own Janus Web. And that really it's all about just opening it up to as many developers and creators as possible, no matter what their background. We have Unity translators, Maya, Unreal, and for me, for us, it's not about necessarily creating new tools, but creating tools that work with existing sets of tools to make it as easy as possible for anybody, no matter what sort of obscure way you work in, to work in Janus.
So was the main motivation behind moving Janus to a web infrastructure, was that because of the developers, or was it also so that you could reduce friction and get people in easier from the
It's
front
been a
end?
very organic experience of people finding Janus and being like, this is what I was expecting with the Metaverse, and then being attracted to it and bringing their own cool stuff to it. And James and Coy, he's like our principal developer of Janus Web, he was just in the community. And that's sort of how our whole team has grown, has been like, somebody makes something incredible, and that's the beauty of having a growing community like this. You wake up one day and somebody's made a portal gun, and you're like, who are you? It's like some kid in, Russia, and he's made a gun that shoots portals at our websites, and you're like, great, let's hire you. That sounds awesome.
So totally open with no friction is the goal here.
Exactly, yeah.
So Alban, that's a good transition to you. So let's talk about Sketchfab. So Sketchfab's a community for sharing, a site and a community for sharing your creative works, right? Now, why did you go with the web? I mean, it's kind of a softball question, I guess, but why did you go with the web for doing this versus deploying some kind of native application where maybe you could have gotten some higher quality renders, because there are aspects of native development that get to the hardware better, that give you higher performance. Why did you choose web tech for this for Sketchfab? And did you explore using native applications to do that at any time in the past?
So we started Sketchfab 5 years ago, so kind of pre-VR, and our goal was really to be the easiest way to publish 3D content and reach the widest audience. We wanted to build a universal 3D player, and our vision was really to get 3D content to be able to reach people outside of the 3D world and go beyond the 3D niche. And the web was really kind of the way to go to do that. Made a lot of sense. So we were one of the first platforms to bet on WebGL back in 2011. And so when we saw VR coming to market, WebVR was essentially like the translation of WebGL into VR. And so it was really the natural thing to do. In terms of quality and performances, like what you publish on Sketchfab is like short form snackable content. It's like it has no logic. It's not a long movie, and so for this kind of thing, we're really able to achieve performances and quality that are really great. Now we support physically based rendering and through formats like GLTF, and so it's really nice. We did look into native applications. The main reason was to be able to have a presence in the App Store. And so we do have a native app in the App Store. Our goal is to replace it with a native shell that embeds our WebVR content.
Right, because the fact of the matter is most mobile apps these days that any of us get that isn't a game, it's actually just a shell on a web view anyway, right?
Yeah.
Most of the content you're looking at is something someone shared from the web, like your Facebook, your Slack, your Twitter. That's actually web content in there anyway, even on your mobile phone, right? You click a link, even if you're still inside Twitter when you're looking at that, that's a web page, right? So if we can get to that with 3D content as well, that would be amazing. So, and if you're not familiar with Sketchfab, check out Sketchfab. I assume it's sketchfab.com, Alban. It lets you upload your FBX files or any other kind of files and animation formats. You support like 30 formats?
50.
50? Jeez. So a ton of formats, and you can just easily upload, and then you can get an embed code just like you could for a YouTube video and put that on a page and share it with everybody. And so now they moved into VR, and to be able to do that for creators who are casual creators, who are not game programmers, that's pretty amazing. And with that, actually, I want to talk a little bit about content creation, because all three of you lean into that a little bit differently. And so I think I'm going to start with you, Samantha, and pick up on this idea of JanusVR. So you mentioned you've got this open community of people that make stuff. I'm assuming they're not all JavaScript programmers.
No, very few.
You've told me you have a markup system for building this stuff now, right?
Yes, so we have markup.
Now we're going to go a little deeper technically, but it's still, for designers mostly, I think we're going to get into here. So yeah, tell folks about your Janus markup.
The markup, it's been evolving. It's more, our main concern is, like I said earlier, trying to find ways that it can be drag and drop in 2D mode, make it super easy so you don't have to really even look at the code. But that being said, it is only a few lines of code, and anybody who is like me and added blinging dollar bills to their MySpace page has edited some HTML before.
Oh, you're dating yourself.
I know. But there is.
I remember MySpace.
I remember MySpace. That actually taught you a few things about the web and how to use it. Yeah, it was cool. But the markup itself is, we're focused on translators and emulators and ways that we can create drag and drop palettes. So we use Sketchfab a ton. I use Sketchfab a ton. I'm actually devastated that you got rid of the 123D Catch app, because that's how I created most of my worlds. But with just a smartphone, taking photogrammetry with an app for free from Sketchfab, I've built probably 20 different worlds, just using it like a drag and drop. I'll take the OBJs, make them lightweight for the web, and then put them in a palette and drag and drop them. And it's like creating a collage out of 3D things from LA or the street or whatever you have in your phone. It costs nothing. So that was what sort of drew me into WebVR, and the markup language that makes it easy to have these multiple web surfaces. I can just drag a cat from a flat web surface into a 3D web surface that made it frictionless, and that's the whole point of our markup, is to literally make it so as much stuff talks to each other as possible, and you don't have to go into VR and learn some interface, and you don't have to learn a bunch of code.
So can you highlight just a few of the other Janus type experiences that your people out there are making that you just discover, like you were mentioning that one where people just make these mods? I mean, what's happening out there in Janus land? I mean, this is the beauty of doing something open. You get surprised by what people do.
Really trippy stuff. Right now we're working on internally kind of creating new standards for the markup that right now I feel like WebVR is in a sort of Web 1.0 type of situation where something will break and then it's just a room that sits dead with a few half-loaded assets forever, and nobody ever goes back there. And that was kind of how Web 1.0 was until we added this the HTTP request, this data layer that allowed you to go back and forth and have real data back and forth between you and the web. And so right now we're looking at ways that we can start bringing in this sort of data layer that will allow us to have real-time visualization, or maybe the weather changes outside, like in the skybox is always reflecting the weather you want it to see, and that's our sort of main focus right now, is how can we breathe life into this sort of right now stagnant, as we're all just figuring it out, space. It doesn't feel alive yet, and I think it will soon when we are able to sort of create standards all together.
So we're still a little bit empty mall right now.
Yeah, a little bit.
We saw that in the early days of Second Life, if any of us remember that.
Yeah.
Right. And now we're going at that, sort of virtual worlds 2.0, if you will, right?
Yeah.
You're saying it's still at the pretty early stages.
And I think
because we're just standing up infrastructure still. And
yeah. I'm most excited about seeing translators and emulators. We have a Windows 95 emulator, and I play solitaire in there sometimes.
Oh, and it just goes, it's up on a surface?
It's up on a surface, and you see really interesting things like the WebAssembly, you've seen it with the Internet Archive, bringing up, JavaScript is such a robust language that you can bring up old operating systems, and you can actually start to look at these things as they were. And I think that this is a really important role that WebVR will play, is sort of compartmentalizing our history in a way that's digestible for people. So you're not just looking at this old script, you get to actually boot up that old script. You actually get to go back and experience what it was like and hear the sounds and go play that game again. And to me, this is like what's so important about the Internet Archive and important about the web is that we're kind of like letting all this stuff go. You update your website once and it's gone, unless it's been archived. And a lot of these operating systems, and I mean, for me, I have an iPhone that I literally have not updated because it has 123D catch on it, and the app is gone now. So it's like a vintage app. So think about that. Like, you have apps that are no longer going to be supported that you like. You've got to keep in this whole ecosystem. And WebVR allows you to create multiple ecosystems and multiple, dimensions and area and times that you can just hop back into. I think that's what's most exciting that I've been seeing anyways.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So Amber, React and the completely different tack Oculus is taking. For the folks in the room, probably important to just give a little bit of a background on React, just as a programming system. But then if you could, please tell folks how you're moving that into VR and the kind of applications you're thinking about there and which developers you're targeting. Give us the point of view of the Oculus strategy, if you will, behind that. You talked about it at F8.
Right.
And I was there for that, and that was a pretty great session that I was at. So would you share that with the audience?
Sure. So React VR is built on React. So the same programming paradigm that you're used to, like using declarative syntax, writing your applications as a function of state, using the Flexbox layout to easily lay out your UI components are going to be available to you in React VR. And the JSX tags that we use, it looks a little bit like markup, but it's strictly in the JavaScript section of your page, and it gets transpiled into standard JavaScript by the React packager.
So it's more of a programming environment at the end of the day, right? I mean, so you're using XML markup to structure the data that's going to get into the application, but you're still, first and foremost, it's a programming paradigm, but you're structuring the data to make that part easier, right? It's not really a designer's language the way some of the other systems are. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, and so that was extending the React framework because there's been a lot of success there where there's legions of React developers in the world. So that makes a lot of sense. But there must be certain use cases then within that you're thinking about targeting. That doesn't sound like super designer friendly unless people are building tools on top of that or something. So can you speak to some of the use cases you were showing off at F8 and the ones that Oculus thinks are going to be the ones that get a lot of traction first, or maybe are relevant to Facebook's business? I mean, whatever makes sense for you to.
Sure, I do want to preface it by saying that we want to support whatever people want to build, and we do hope that developers come up with new creative applications that we as framework developers didn't even think of. So don't let this limit your thinking. Although one kind of app that I found compelling and that some of our partners have already been building with is actually similar to the app that was demoed yesterday at the keynote, the 360 video of the park with the birds flying overhead. This idea of 360 videos or 360 photos linked together to allow you to explore a site. Already, those have been built with React VR. An example was exploring a museum, exploring a city, and that had some gamification elements where you could collect objects like a treasure hunt, visiting an underwater rift, a site that would be difficult or dangerous to explore in person. You can visit with WebVR. And React VR makes it easy to combine these 360 videos, 360 photos with this 2D UI elements like buttons or text, photos, 2D videos to make your scene interactive and give you more context and information about what you're seeing.
Yeah, but do you have a fancy alpha mask shader?
And we don't have or solar flares.
No solar flares yet. Next version. Right. Okay, so Alban, Sketchfab takes a little bit of a different tack on this stuff, right? I mean, you're going straight for the artist-type creators, right? Straight out of the DCC tools, not so much on the markup and interaction design side, though you have a little bit of interaction in the player as well, right? So let's talk about that. I mean, what's Sketchfab's orientation about the kind of content you're trying to enable and the ecosystem you're trying to develop from the point of view of the creator?
So yeah, we're focusing only on the content creators and essentially taking care of the code so that they don't have to do it themselves. When we started, our power users were really traditional CG artists, guys using like 3ds Max and Blender and Unity. And what's interesting is that over the past 1 or 2 years, we've seen 2 new big trends emerging. One is VR creation, and so like Tilt Brush and Medium and Quill and Gravity Sketch, all the ways to design in 3D inside a 3D space in VR, and it's really growing fast on Sketchfab. And the other very big trend is around 3D capture. Typically, I always carry my Tango phone in my pocket. I call it the skateboard because it's a bit big. That's the first consumer phone with a built-in 3D camera. And so it lets me take 3D photos of anything in real time. And then I can publish that straight to Sketchfab. And typically, 3D capture 2 years ago was maybe 10% of the uploads, and now it's 50% of the uploads. And so we have more and more hobbies and like normal people taking 3D photos of people, of places, of things, of food, of their shoes, like really anything, really like Instagram-style use cases. And so we think that's a typical use case where WebVR is perfect way to distribute that, making a Unity app, like well, any native app to publish a 3D photo would be like really overkill, whereas like WebVR, you publish straight from your capture app to Sketchfab and consume it like inside a tweet, inside Facebook, everywhere.
Okay, so is this the metaverse? I mean, is this or these the foundational pieces of what everybody's been dreaming about in that realm, as opposed to downloading one app after another app after another app? It's a leading question, but really, is this a waypoint on the way to the metaverse, or is this the infrastructure that's going to make that happen? You're working on social, you're working on a browser, you've got a sharing system. I mean, this is already a rich palette just between these 3 people that represent their businesses up here, right? So I wonder, are we going to see this be the foundational pieces that 3 years or so, whatever, some number of years, we look back and we say, those were the bits and pieces. It didn't look anything like any of us predicted. It didn't look like what Neil Stephenson or Ernst Klein had written about, but it's actually what we're doing, and we're in there all the time, and we're doing VR and sharing. So I'm going to say yes, by the way, but I'm just, can we have the rest of you add a little color to that and think about how this might play out over the next little while here? Samantha, you can go first.
I think in a sense the web already is the metaverse. We're just the first iteration of it, and we're going to keep diving deeper into that. I think people need to take a vested interest in their persistence of their digital self online in order for us to move into having avatars and things like that. If it's not just going to exist in one place, it needs to exist everywhere. Then we need to start looking at there's a lot of problems that need to be solved, and that's one of the big ones that we're trying to tackle with Janus is how do you break people apart? Like how do you create these social experiences without people acting crappy after they get to about 100 people or so, and how do you sort people out? Well, you'd want to sort them based on maybe their neighborhood, or if they have their Tinder on, or if they only want to see people of a certain age group and whatnot. And in order to do that, we need to start taking ownership of our data, or have some sort of access to create a presence that's beyond just one platform or beyond just our Google. And I think that's sort of one of the biggest things I'm most passionate about is helping people to find a way to kind of create that as a layer, and whether or not I don't think app stores are going to go away. I think that we'll sort of find a way to integrate them. I think that these shells, or Google's putting out the progressive web app, sort of their lighthouse standards for people to create smart caches. And
effectively, it's a web app, but it looks like a native app because you can install it, save it on your home screen.
Exactly, and it allows people to build with a cache in mind, so it'll cache things, and that's something that I think will be very promising. I don't think we're going to see any one thing take over. I think the metaverse will just sort of absorb all of those standards. Like, if you're in an app and you're playing in a game, I think when I'll feel like we'll have the metaverse is when I can jump from that game to another game.
Right.
And I think that that's what WebVR is aiming, that's what my intention is to become the thing that connects it all. It's not to be the platform that gives it all to you, it's the thing that connects everything to each other.
Sweet. Just a quick program note before we get more responses on that. We are going to do some QA, but I would queue up on that microphone. Everyone see that microphone right there? So if you want to ask a question, think about it, get ready, and get up there soon. Thank you. Alban.
So I would agree as well that the web is kind of the metaverse. I think what's important here is that VR is a super fragmented ecosystem, so many different tools, headsets, like when you have a headset, you don't even know where can you find content for it. And it's a bit the same thing with the 3D world. There are more than 100 3D file formats, so much more fragmented than video or sound or images. And so the web is definitely the way to standardize this and let you like jump from one piece of content to another one. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned, speaking of formats, you mentioned GLTF earlier. Well, I'll put in a plug for that. That's a format that I worked on for several years. And it's effectively the JPEG of 3D, and it can get all your data out of your digital content creation tools into an open format that can be used in mobile and web, VR, AR, all kinds of applications. It's being supported across the industry. Oculus is heavily behind it. Microsoft is shown at a meetup I was at in San Francisco, GLTF in your PowerPoint and your Word docs, like integrated into Office. That was a proud moment for me. And so that's really great. So we're going to have the 3D interchange format where we can share all this data, and it won't be locked into one application, one vendor format. And so Sketchfab's supporting it too, Oculus. I don't know if you guys are doing GLTF at Janus. That's great. So that's a really good perspective as well, Alban. How about you, Amber? Is it the Metaverse yet?
Disagree with Tony on this.
Uh-oh.
I guess it depends.
I paid her to do a little bit of drama so we have some excitement on the panel. Oh, really?
I guess it
Really?
depends, what you mean by the metaverse, and a lot of times that term refers to a virtual world that looks and feels and behaves like our physical world. And I'm not convinced that's the only place that virtual reality is heading. So I hope that WebVR is more than the metaverse, and the sum of all WebVR apps, I hope, is more than just a copy of our physical world.
Truth. Got a first questioner there. Let's do it. We got 2.5 minutes.
My name is Kevin Mitchell. I work for State Farm. My question is, one second. So with the WebKit team announcing WebGPU, what kind of big problems you guys expect this to solve for WebVR?
What was the second half of that? You said WebGPU?
Yeah, WebGPU. WebKit announced WebGPU, and do you guys expect that to solve any big problems for you guys in WebVR, or?
I know about WebGPU if you guys don't.
I know.
So yeah, it's an Apple announcement. So this is part of the team that's actually worked with the WebGL team as well from Apple. They're just pushing the boundaries on rendering. This is a very early effort. We don't know if this is going to be a new standard that would supplant WebGL beyond 2 or move in a different direction. I mean, part of the thing that happened is WebGL, which really kicked off in about 2009 and then got popular around 2012, and hit all the browsers and now runs everywhere, and all those phones you guys are all looking at. It is basically a few years behind all the newest rendering technologies, and then Vulkan and Metal and all these new other, and DX17 or wherever they're out there. All these new technologies have come along that have rewritten the rules on rendering once again and gotten even lower level and hard to deal with for most normal humans like me, and so then everyone's going to write tools for it. That whole thing might now find life on the web again in some new standard, but it's very early, and Apple's just, I think moving in that direction now to rewrite the rules on that. But that's a few years out if it's even going to have an impact on us. We don't know where that's going to go.
Thank you.
Thanks. We got time for a couple more, so yeah, jump in there.
Hi, I'm Trevor from the Spaciblo project. We're in a design process where we're talking to a bunch of creators about what would get them to go and create WebVR spaces. And one of the things we're hearing consistently is that they are concerned about abuse and harassment in spaces that they open up to the public. So for the three of you who are working on social spaces, are you seeing design patterns or any sort of thing that we can do and look to as ways to sort of make people, no matter where they are on the web, when they show up in these spaces, they know how to react and that they have things that they can do to react to abuse and harassment?
Samantha, why don't you start on that one? I think that's your wheelhouse.
Yeah. I mean, I was just talking about these are the issues that we are dealing with is not even dealing yet with the harassment side, though we have, we just added a push to talk feature and things like that. I'm a little bit more on the punk rock, it's not a metaverse if you can't be an 8-foot tall naked person. But that's not obviously what you want to hear at a corporate conference. I think that there is going to be, that's a huge concern. I think just authorship and creating standards where it's okay, you've been verified, right? And then maybe you get marked, there's practices that are going to go into that with social, but I think that what our main goal with it is to help people to create their own servers and make their own rules. I fear this trend towards everyone looking for other people to make them safe online. We're in a post-private world. We no longer have privacy. You cannot opt out. It is up to you to sort of, in a way, pull up your pants, and if you're a platform, like we work on the sort of more like the B2B right now, that's what I'm concerned with, which is own your server, own your space, use our stuff on it, and then control it how you want to. But as far as our native client and users going in there, it's definitely something that, I'm sure Amber can speak to it more from working at AltSpace, but it's definitely something that, yeah, you want to try and figure out. We've been discussing for our club we're releasing, like, how do we make the daemons come out and suck you out of the ground if you're being a jerk? And there's ways to do it, but I would push towards people creating a culture for themselves on their own server that, like, if you visit this, you're in control of it. Because constantly handing off these sort of, like, platforms over to, really, it's only Google and Facebook. You're going to go by their community guidelines, and they've sorted that out. And it may seem like an easier route to do, but at the end of the day, it's not really preparing anybody for these bigger questions when we're all connected, and it's not preparing you for the real world.
Oh, that's awesome, Samantha. Actually, we actually hit the red on the timer. So if you want to hold that question and come see us over here off to the side, our panelists will be getting off and unmiking. Come say hi. Thank you. Can we get a round of applause for our panelists today? Yeah, you guys were really great, and a lot of amazing insights here, and we'll see you all in the Metaverse really soon. Cheers.